today I'm going to be hosting a demo with the wonderful Geraths from California. And he's doing a demo using gouache. So that's really different. I really don't know anything about gouache, so I'm going to learn a lot. We're going to actually see how the gouache moves on the paper. And Gary's going to teach us a lot about gouache during our demo today. If you're new to Studio 56, you should know that in addition to free demos and interviews like this one, we also organize travel vacation workshops for artists and their special friends. We also have online workshops that are available at www.studio56boutique.com. Please go there and check it out. Just to tell you a little bit about Gary. Gary is a professor of art at Otis College in California. He teaches drawing, background design, vehicle design, portrait and costume drawing, landscape, painting and environmental drawing, storyboarding, figure drawing and painting, just to name a few. That's a lot of stuff. I think there isn't anything Gary can't do. He was the courtroom sketch artist at the O.J. Simpson criminal trial, and he's the author of 5-Minute Sketching Animals and Pets and Animal Drawing. He has traveled, sketched, and painted all over the US, Europe, and parts of Asia and Africa. And today he's going to be doing a demo for us using gouache, a scene from Morocco. So let's bring Gary into the call.
Hey there.
Hey, Gary. Good to see you.
Same here.
Tell us about what we're going to be seeing today in the demo.
I did a demo, and it's of Essaouira, the port of Essaouira, Morocco. And I did literally all the way from the layout of the pencil drawing to the finished thing, to the finished piece with different techniques. So I'm going to show you the layout of it, then how to go in and sort of bring it up using dry brush. That's one thing I do like about gouache, is the fact that you can layer all these different techniques on top of what you're doing, and it shows a lot of texturalness sometimes. So if you're doing rock walls or like older objects, or it's just like wooden stuff, it really gives you a much more of a wider variety of looks to your piece, right? And that's one thing I like about it, is that also it's really forgiving. I mean, you can layer stuff on, and you can use, like I said, thick impasto paint over the top of it, and you can do, light over dark, and it's just a really nice medium, and it travels well too. So that's the way I'm going to lay it out, is I'm going to go from pencil to shape design to blockouts to atmospherics, and then to textural dry brushing, and then some finishing off sort of techniques at the end.
Yeah. I have a question about it. I just recently did a painting, and I had to lift some of the paint off. Does it lift off? Can you lift it off?
Yeah. I mean, so some of the like, it's like watercolor in the fact that if you have a staining color like a Windsor green or something, it'll hold to the paper a little bit more. But for the most part, I was just working on one last night where I totally screwed up a cactus. I went out to the desert and painting it, wetted it all down, and just lifted 95% of the paint off to repaint it again.
That's so cool. I have my show and tell. So I bought some gouache. I haven't even tried it yet. And I put it in this special container that Gary recommended last month. And I put it in there like several weeks ago. It's still wet.
Yeah.
It's still wet. It's nice and juicy. So that's interesting. I'm really excited to try it at some point.
It travels really well. I mean, that's one thing I like about it.
Yeah. It's got this special container, so I'm excited. I'm going to try it. Not today, though.
No. No paint alongs.
Yeah. So people, we're going to get started right away. Gary and I are going to turn off our cameras and our video, cameras and audio, and you can ask some questions in the Q&A box down below. And at the end, we're going to go right through, and at the end, we'll be happy to answer questions. All right, so let's get started.
So I'm going to start with this little layout pencil drawing of this harbor in Essaouira, Morocco. And it's a lot of architecture and a lot of objects in here. So I'm making sure that I kind of keep my edges a little bit more clearly defined. So when I get in and start to paint them, I'll be able to sort of keep the edge control a lot more understandable. and clear, so when I get into the painting, I'll be able to sort of define where all of those forms go. And then as I sort of work around them and try to decide where the edges are lost and found, or where one object sort of flows into another, I'll be able to make the choice at that point. That way, my forms that I'm drawing, the objects I'm drawing in here, don't become sort of a mess right off the bat. And that's one of the things I actually like about working in gouache, is the fact that you can go in and hammer in a little bit more of the information via a pencil, because since the gouache is a lot more on the opaque side, or can be, you can go over the top of that, and most of those pencil lines are going to disappear if you want them to. Having said that, though, I don't go in and put a lot of detail or information into the boats or into the structures there. One of the reasons for it is I do want to keep it open-ended enough where I can use much more of a transparent, fluid amount of gouache in there, and also at the same time being able to add and subtract information. I don't want to get too much of an overdone pencil layout, because then I'm going to be forced in my own brain to kind of follow that, rather than just looking at the basic layout and design and then fill accordingly to it. That means if I'm plein air painting, I can shift along with the changing light, change shadows, change my lighting as long as it's cohesive, really play up the entire composition as I put it together. So when I mix this up, use a little bit of white here. I'm going to start out with the sky, a little schmaltz blue here, probably a little bit of ultramarine in there as well. And I'm very much of a shape painter. So at first I try to sort of block in everything in a very sort of generic local color sort of way. And of course there'll be some variation in that paint blocks that you'll be seeing, those shapes that I'll be putting in. But in general, what I'm trying to do is I like to paint details on things, and it's a sort of a trap that I've made for myself. So I figure if I get it painted large at first, get it all general in, and again, this goes to plein air painting, then what I can do is I can look at the rhythm and the harmony of the entire painting rather than just the pieces of it. It also goes in relationship to the shadow patterns as well. So that's what I'm doing with the sky right now, is I'm painting the sky color, because also you'll see that that sky color that I mix will go into a lot of the shadows and a lot of the other pieces of the painting, just to kind of, again, keep it harmonized. So now with the sky blocked in, I'm going to start to knock in the bridge, the shadow parts. And as you can see, I'm taking that cadmium orange and mixing it in with that blue sky that I just made. Again, it's a complementary color, so it makes a really nice, juicy kind of gray. And as I mentioned before, the beauty of gouache is that mistakes really aren't mistakes. So even the arches and the bridges that I'm painting right now, I'm not being overly precise with it. Maybe in my back painting there, you can see I'm being a little bit more architectural with it. But I also figure that the arch itself is going to be in darkness, so that will go over the lighter paint. So in that, as I lay that out, I'm mixing warms into cools. You can see the orange sort of pop through a little bit more, and the blue right now is sort of influencing the cool colors a little bit. There's a little bit of a close-up of it, so you can see me like really laying this stuff in. So now to play off of that, put a little swatch in there to make sure it's kind of safe, maybe make it a little bit lighter, and then shape paint again. Perhaps it's not as noticeable, but there is color variations inside of those large warm patterns. Right now, like again, I'm trying to get that lighting pattern down, the idea of the shadow pattern and the lighting pattern. That way I can make a decision a little bit later on using a little wet and wet technique there, pulling in a little bit more yellow in my pan right there, mixing a little bit more white in there just to kind of get it a little bit on the warmer side, a little bit on the lighter side, so it'll play off against the shadow that comes down off that bridge. And even then, I'm setting this up, a lot of it sort of semi-flat, because I know that I'm going to be putting textures and I'm going to be glazing in different colors over the top of it, which makes gouache a really nice little painting medium to work with. So now I'm going to move over into the side of the tower and decide to make it a little bit more on the cool side. So I mix in a little bit more ultramarine blue to it, probably a little bit of linsum crimson, just to sort of fire it off a little bit more, because once again, I'm going to paint this rather flat, even though there will be variations in that the painting strokes there and the amount of materials in the brush. but I'm going to be going over the top of it probably with a little bit more of a warmer brown a little bit later. And once you might notice, again, I'm mixing into that sky color and then coming in here and laying in the other part of the bridge. Again, mixing in a little bit more violet and a little bit more ultramarine blue with just a little bit of orange, again, complementary to warm it up a little bit. And now I'm going to get that other part of the shadow there. And you'll see that, that even though I laid it out, the shadow is going to be a little bit crooked. And the beauty of gouache, again, is I can go back in there later and fix it. I can sort of straighten it out a little bit and even add a little bit more texture to the stones. So as we move back out here to the entire composition, I'm going to try to shape weld and value weld that bridge and the arch into the water, right? The reflection into the water. As I said, one of the things I'm trying to do is treat this more as a large compositional painting first before going in and getting all the details. This first part of the painting is sort of like a layout or a design, almost as an underpainting. Then I will put in the textures and the rhythms and the details later on. That's a reflection off of the tower. And then I kind of come back here so you can see my brush kind of moves around. I'm trying to see if I can use that color elsewhere in the painting. Now this is where I pull the bridge back in. See, I'm not trying to match the exact color of the bridge. I'm trying to get a little bit of that blue of the water in with it. And then once again, the reflection of the arch is going to be there, so I sort of cut that in too. Very broad general ways. Even use a little bit more of a watercolory wet on wet technique there, just because I may not want to get it too opaque. Now I'm going to be pulling in the color of the water at this point, so I'm mixing some white, ultramarine blue, a little bit of probably peacock blue there. It's sort of one of my go-tos is for ocean water. Or brighten it up a little bit, but you can see the wet on wet. I mean, it's everything's just kind of blending into one another. Yes, I'm trying to keep my shapes in there, and you can see as I bring in the reference materials here, even though that water's relatively flat in the photograph, is I know from personal experience that it's not, because there's little ripples and there's little reflections there. The photography takes a little bit of that information out. So what I'm doing is, once again, kind of matching up the underpainting, knowing that I'm probably going to go darker and lighter, again, the beauty of gouache, over the top of that. There's some wet on wet techniques. Just trying to pull it together. See, at this point, I'm trying to get the reflection of the bridge and the water to kind of work together. And even using the same color going up into the sky, noticing that there's a little change of lighting there. So now I'm mixing up some paint. I'm going to move into those arches. Paints I'm mixing up is a little bit lighter because I know I'm going to be going over the top of that with a pretty dark mixture later. I'm also trying to get a little bit more texture, so I do this thing called marbleizing, where I don't necessarily mix all the paint up. I leave streaks in it, so the paint has a little bit more of a individual textural suggestion in it, especially for stones, rocks, things like that. Stuff that has a little bit more of a rougher, edgier kind of look to it. Now moving on to a lot more of a translucent, transparent painting into the shadow coming off that boat. I know in the photograph it looks really dark, but once again, is that I'm using the photograph for reference. I'm using my memory for what I know actually happened. So I'm trying to get much more of a glistening kind of look to the top of that shadow. Once again, then I'll be putting texture into it later. So this is sort of like an underpainting, and I want to have it not look like the solidity of the water right next to it. Now I'm going to lay in a little bit of that transition between the arch and the reflection there. You can see a little bit of that marbling with the grays and the browns and maybe even some of the blues in there. Now I laid in light because it's sort of a test strip, so I can look at it and kind of see if it works on a really, really quick basis. And then add texture and ripples and other effects later after I get, again, sort of get the whole groove of the thing down. Okay, so moving on to the boats now. I laid in that little swatch to see what the value and color was, and it looks like it's a little bit on the dark side, so I'm lightening it up and laying it in. And as I do this, again, I'm paying really special attention to the actual shapes. Mixed in a little bit of that yellow ochre here just to kind of knock it back a little bit. It's got a little bit of a gold color, a little bit of orange in it, so it makes a little bit of a nicer complement sort of on the side of the boat there. And as I put this in, from looking at the actual reference, you can probably see when it comes up that there's a lot of detail in these boats. And one of my difficult parts here, as I lay it out, is to make sure that once again it's the shape and the basic information I lay in as I move from one boat to another boat, and sometimes kind of half finishing one and then moving on to the next. Sort of right here, sort of painting the perimeter and using that same sort of turquoise blue here, or robin's egg blue here, to just kind of piece it all together. And then I can come back to it later and then add the secondary kind of pieces of information in. So if you look up at the palette, you can see that I'm really isolating my color mixtures, right? My value mixtures. So the up above was the bridge and the tower, and then we moved into sort of like the ocean water, and now I've got this other separate mixture of just the boats, right? So I'm going to use that as my, like, again, because I have to keep these colors a little bit more on the pure side in my brain, just because of like they're man-made, they have much more of an edge to them, and even the colors on them are a lot more shape-oriented. What I mean by that is, like, it's almost like all of the colors are isolated within those shapes and contrasts. So even here, adding a little bit of that green to the lower section, just so it plays off the contrast of that reflection on the ocean water there. Again, shape. So I'm using a flat brush and being very careful about the edges. Again, I can blur those edges out later, and you'll see that I'll do that. But at this point, this is almost, like I said, sort of an underpainting that I'm going to end up putting the lights and the darks over. So these are the bows of the ships right here, or excuse me, of the boats. You might also notice that and if you look at the photograph, the reference here, there's a lot more boats there than I actually am painting. The reason for that is number one, if I attempt to handle every one of those little boats there, I'm going to drive myself nuts when it comes to actually finishing off the painting. And once again, I want people to be able to look at the painting and recognize that they are looking at, like, fishing boats, right? These sort of boats that go out in the morning and come back in the afternoon and unload their cargo. And now I'm going to move back to these fishing boats back here in the back. And once again, even though I'm trying to keep the shape there, as I move backwards in my color mixing, you notice I mix a little bit more sort of a burnt umber in there to make a darker color, right? Not making not mixing a black, but mixing burnt umber and ultramarine blue. It makes a really nice kind of dark. And even here, when I move back into this area where I start to lay the boats in and kind of pick up the main, I'm going to say, architectural parts of it, but the pieces of it, like the sitting boards and the other stuff, is that I start to mix in, you'll see a little bit of like orange in there. Again, it's a complement of blue. It knocks that color back, desaturates it a little bit. And then what it does is it hopefully, like, visually moves those boats just a little bit farther away, even though I am trying to keep the saturation up pretty well. I mean, one thing I am doing as I put this together is I'm planning for the future of the painting. Whether I'm working off a reference or if I'm working plein air, is that my eye is sort of floating over the top of this information as I'm putting in. Not so much trying to be exact with it at first, but once again, getting my shape design my lost and found edges. Like here you can see I'm sort of hitting it a little bit more dark so it comes up against the edge of the composition and the wall in the background. And not worrying so much about getting it perfect right at first, because this is, as I go through here, I can start to, file it in the back of my head, like where I'm going to be putting, quote unquote, the details or the equipment or the gear or the more color or, even light balances coming off the tower a little bit later on to the boats. You can see that influence maybe on some of the more wetter parts of the seats that are there. You'll see that there's like little teeny tiny inflections, and that's what I'm doing with the orange. And even at this point, I'm sort of putting a little bit of orange in those mixtures, just so perhaps later when I put more intense saturated bits on there, it won't look so isolated. As I move backwards into the painting, what I mean by that is the boats in the back, my eye is still flittering over the top of the painting, looking at different parts of it, even though I haven't painted on anything else but the boats. I'm definitely keeping the color mixtures on the bridge and in the water in effect. So as I put the thing together, is like I don't want to ruin the fact that these boats are completely in shadow. So I know that I'm going to have to knock some of this back, like that white that I'm putting in there right there. And I should say white, this like light blue I'm putting in right there is, I already know I have to knock that back later on. But at this point, once again, I'm not sitting there trying to fixate on it too much. So in this last little section, I'm going to mix in a little bit of this cobalt turquoise and a little bit of ultramarine blue. Again, trying to get sort of a darker color and block it in pretty quickly and pretty decisively. The reason for it is it's in the background. I don't necessarily want to put a lot of focus on this. My focus is going to be more on the reflection of the tower on the water and the edges of the boats back there. I do want to make sure that the rhythm of the shapes and the certain parts of the boats identify. But once again, I'm just trying to pull the whole painting together at this point. So as you notice that I go back in here and mix my paints, I'm very conscientious about these pools I put together. And you might notice, like take for instance, I mixed a lighter color and then picked that up and moved it into the dark part, but I didn't really screw the edges of the puddles up, right? So each one of those colors and even the different little hues that are there, I can make use of that, right? So if I need to come back and pick out a specific color that I might have missed, like on the edge of a boat or even on the bridge or something, you'll be able to see that I kind of make use of it, that I don't obliterate it just by careless mixing the colors. These pools are pretty segregated in what I'm doing, but you'll also notice that they keep to the same hue. Like now I got that little piece of the bridge that I kind of left out, went back to the original one, and then filled it back in. These like little touch-ups of the water. This little area back here, this last little piece, and then essentially this will be the kind of finish of my underpainting. So at this point, I take a step back and make sure the composition's cohesive, and if I need to make any little tweaks here and there to sort of pull it together. Okay, so I cleaned my palette here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a little bit of some crimson, some orange, and then some ultramarine blue together with a little bit more orange in it to sort of brighten the stones up a little bit. Now again, I know it looks darker and you can see that the light reflecting on it. And though the photograph looks like it looks very light, I remember from my paintings that I did there and also from just observation, I guess how much you can say how photographs lie, how I'm changing it to reflect more what it looks like in real light, or how I would paint it plein air. So now I'm even going to mix some flame red into it, once again to sort of lighten up and warm up this side of the bridge to kind of play off the boats and play off the water, and I'll even bring those warmer colors into the reflection later on in the painting. You can see it even though I've got the lighting on it, you can't see the real color. You can actually see the shapes that I'm painting there, being very, I wouldn't say careful, but very focused about where I'm going to do it. Like so even up here, I'm going to try to push those reds more towards where the lighting towards the edges, so it'll look different than, say, the darker area that moves away from the light. Use the same color, kind of bounce in the windows, not all of them, but just a few of them. Little doors. You can see that little, even that little orange I just put in there. Once again, it's more like a bounce light, so the light may be hitting the wall and then bouncing back in to the wall. And then even using that and moving it now down into the reflection and sort of breaking that shape up a little bit more, giving the idea of the ripples on the water. So now I'm going to add some more of those sort of transparent, translucent lights that are on that wall. And once again, if you notice the way I'm moving my color, I'm mixing, my guess is a cadmium yellow in with a little bit of that flame red and making it more watery solution. So once again, I'm kind of dry brushing it up over the top of the stones. I don't want it to overwhelm it. I kind of like that base yellow color. It gives the idea of that morning light. So again, I don't want to interrupt that, but I'm also cutting into it. So you see I'm using that flat brush there to cut in the ramparts, sort of break down those little areas where the cannons go through the bridge. But once again, now I'm moving from the dark back into the light and trying to get the composition cohesive. Sort of moving the lights into the darks and then the darks into the lights. And it's one of the points I like about gouache is that you can go from a very watery mix, like almost like a watercolor. You can use wet and wet techniques, but when you need to really fix something, you can mix in a really, really thick version of whatever color you see. You can kind of see it right there. And just using the side of the brush, just lightly kind of caress it in and just kind of glaze over the top of it, so you still pick up the color underneath it. Frequently, if you make it a little bit of a thicker mixture, what you can do is, as you can see there, is I'm really making the light a lot more solid. Frequently also, you can take it and make it a watery mix and then pick up the color that's underneath it and glaze over the top of that. So that's what I'm doing right now, is I'm kind of fixing and making that part of the wall a lot more solid with a lot more idea of implying a stony texture over the top of that sunlit part of the wall. Now if you look at that pool of paint that I have in my palette, you can see it goes all the way from relative dark to a very light. And now once I'm coming in here and kind of trying once again to put some more effects into it, I'm bringing some more opaque paint into it so it lifts over the top of the water, or you can see the fact that that intense white yellow goes right towards the sun, the light source, and then mixing it up into the orange and then painting a little bit of that bounce light or ambient light back in the wall there. Now, I know that right now it looks intense, but I also know that it's going to dry into that matrix of that dark color, that dark shadow color. So by the time it dries, it won't be so obvious. Once again, I'm painting what I know about shadows and what I know about light rather than what I see on the photograph. Now I figured out it's time to start punching up the darks, the shadow shapes in here. And so I'm going into those two arches and accenting the tunnels that lead out the other side of the bridge. I'm not painting with black. What I'm doing is mixing together ultramarine blue and burnt umber together, probably with a little bit of linsome crimson there, just to kind of give it a little bit more of a warmth to it. So that's what I'm doing right now, is knowing that even though those areas behind those tunnels are, behind the arches are dark, I still have to have a little bit of a warmth in there. And then taking the same color mixtures and now working that into the reflection. Also sort of flat, as I'm not really going for a lot of ripples and a lot of texture in there, because once again, I'm trying to figure out the warms and the cools and how far I want to extend that down. Then using the same thing, same colors that is, coming back in and adding those like little shadow touches on the other sides of the walls. That's on the stone up there, little windows up there in the turrets, and then probably back down into the doors, just to kind of get little shadows back in there. You can see it's, again, just trying to organize the entire composition together. Even though haven't touched the boats yet, I know that that will be something I'm going to add to it later. But though I may be painting one section of it, my eye's still roving over the entire composition because I want to make it cohesive. I want to pull the entire thing together. and use the colors that I'm using now, or the values that I'm using now, and be able to sort of move those around the composition to kind of pull it together. And there you can see it as I'm putting my mixture together for the reflection. I'm using an ultramarine blue and a raw sienna since it's a warmer color. I don't want the absolute black that I have in the tunnels, and it's a good way of taking that intermediate value. Now I'm mixing it with a little white in here and a little bit more blue, just again to get the idea of the surface color of the water. You can see the color mixing going back and forth, and now mixing the reflection vertically rather than just putting a bunch of ripples in it. Once again, I want that reflection shape to be somewhat flat with some texture in it. That'll become, let's say, the dance, where I have to make sure that I get the idea of the reflection there, but at the same time it doesn't overwhelm the rest of the composition. That's why I popped in some of those blues there, because I know I'm going to come over with some warmer colors to reflect the side of the bridge later. But as of right now, see, I'm just reinforcing that reflection. Again, so you can pick up the pattern, and it helps with the perspective of moving your eye back in space as well. Now, if you noticed, I didn't even wash off the brush. I'm using that same color that I used for the reflection of the sea. So now I'm coming back in and mixing that into the orange, and I'm getting this really nice, like that marbleizing point, like I said before, the one where you end up getting streaks of paint that don't mix on the palette but mix visually. And it helps with the texture of the rocks, or at least hinting at it. And then I can move it up into the actual lit areas as well, because the light is a lot lighter and my paint in my brush is a lot thinner. Now I'm adding just a little bit of that cool color to the upper part of the tower and over to that wall, just again to kind of visually bring them together a little bit more. It's just very, very thin wash, as you can see here in this close-up. But also what's more important is you can see the warm and cool overlaps in the actual stones in the bridge and up into the tower. I'm going to do a little tour here through the painting, and then you can once again see it sort of in this like 60-70% version, and the way the paint actually reacts, whether it's the like dry brushing right there on the boat, whether it's the wet on wet up there in the reflections or on the wall, the shape design in the boats, leaving some of the paper in there. That's one of the things I've really come to like about gouache, is the fact that how many layers and different kind of impasto to transparent paint that you can put inside of one of your pieces. Okay, now I've come to the real fun and dangerous part. I'm going to put these ripples in. I'm using some cadmium green along with some cobalt turquoise, and I'm kind of mixing them together with that base color I used for the reflections on the bridge, and I'm going to pull those lines and colors into the more flatter areas of the water, the sky color basically. You can see I'm using some dry brush, a lot of dry brush on that, using that flat brush marks, keeping the lines thinner in the background, and then as it gets towards you, the perspective will make the forms and make those ripples a little bit larger. You know, the dance here is trying to get all those cool little reflections and ripples and all the rest of it, and not overwhelm your composition with a bunch of busy work. Even there, I'm trying to take that, if you notice the dark blue flat paint underneath, and then build up a darker stroke over the top of it. So after getting that all down, I realized it's too busy, so I'm just picking up some water and then just washing back into it to soften it up. And I'm going to come over with a little bit of white and then punch those little ripples over the top of that. Once again, going from the lights to the darks to kind of drag your eye back in perspective. Okay, so now on to the boats. Right now, I'm sort of trying to figure out what color I absolutely want. You can see my brush sort of bounces all over the place into those blues. And I kind of came up with a mixture where I want to use a lot of ultramarine blue and then kind of lay that in. It looks nice, and it's a very rich kind of color on that. It sets it up right into the foreground. But I'm also going to mix a little bit of ultramarine blue with some burnt umber in there to sort of knock it back a little bit. You can see there. So the railings, being very careful again. So you can see using that flat brush, which is basically the one I've been using for everything, is I look at the color mixtures. I don't want, the reason why I tilt it more towards the ultramarine is the fact that I don't want those dark areas of that boat, even though they look black, to separate away from the rest of the composition, which using black has a tendency to do. So I mix my darks out of, like say, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, burnt umber. I'll use like a Windsor green with a flame red. That makes a real nice dark as well. And then tilt it towards the color I want. So even though I'm trying to go for that sort of like really, really dark color on the side of the boat and on the inside, I still tilt it more towards the blues. That way it won't fall apart into pieces, which, believe me, I'm really trying to keep my handle on doing that right now. It's so easy to get mixed up in all of this, like little riggings and the lighting and the letters and the signage and the all the ropes and the gear on the inside. So once again, I'm keeping to that boat shape, right? It's that triangular shape in the front, and then when I get to the back of the boat, I really make sure I keep that a little bit more on the square side, just so it's identifiable. You can see that in the value contrast where the bow of that one boat comes up the back end of the lighter part. Really keeping those edges very, very, I wouldn't say clean, but very sort of aware of those. So once again, you don't have to paint the boat really hardcore. You just have to make sure that certain parts of the boat, like the corner of a boat up against another side, so you have a flat against one color or one value, and you hit, like, once again, I'm using the little places where you sit, the little seats where you sit in, to help gauge the width of the boat. And just hinting at that, not overly rendering it out, because that's one thing I want to make sure that as I go into this every layer, it communicates as opposed to screams boat. The eye will pick that up and pretty much be able to put that information together, especially since I'm using that one in the foreground as my sort of icon, right? It's the iconography of that boat. Once you get that down and the eye understands, or the brain understands what it is, it can multiply that information as it goes further through the other objects. Okay, now I got to force myself away from those boats, but I'm going to use the same mixture that I have there in those accents, and then go back once again and reinforce the darker parts of those archways, right? And then take that and then move it into a little bit of the reflections. So once again, trying to tie the background into the foreground more. And then even using that darker area there and a little bit of that dry brush to kind of punch your eye and contrast the boats in the front, and even that little bit where the water comes in on that wall in the background. So now at this point, I'm going to mix some really ugly grays, right? So that's a Windsor green mixed in with a flame red, and then I'm even moving some raw sienna into it. So it is tilting a little bit more towards the warmth part of it, but the green is still coming through because I want to pick up the aquas that are in the water. Having said that, I don't want all the colors to like vibrate, right? I want some of them to be rather neutral and flat, just so they may play off against something in the background. You see I'm using that dark area back there to kind of format that small boat in the background, rather than getting worried about making sure the wall looks perfectly well set up with textures. Okay, now it's time to slam in those cast shadows or reflections on the water there from the boat. So I'm mixing up some ultramarine blue, a little bit of that Windsor green, and then putting that in there, getting the dry brush. So I sort of took a little bit of water out of it, and that way as I can move the brush really quickly and getting more of a rougher dry brush look over the top of it. That, once again, hopefully separates the boat away from the water. And then getting a little bit of that texture underneath the boat as well, on top of that green. Once again, it's not so much about copying whatever you're standing in front of, if you're plein air painting or if you're even using reference on here, is that what I'm trying to do is cohesively put the whole composition together. So if I was plein air painting and doing this outside, I'd have that first sketch and then the paint sketch put in as an underpainting, and then I can decide how much of a reflection, how much of a shadow gets put in. Right now you can see I'm trying to pick up the rhythm again of filling in the information on the boats, but at the same time not get like completely overwhelmed by it, and then coming back in, like I said before, and then realizing that the shadow or the reflection on that from that boat was too much. It was too textured, which I have a tendency to do. And I'm coming in and sort of softening it up, the edges up a little bit more, using a little bit of that cobalt green, and then keeping the rhythm back into the water, not really too aggressively. I don't want to come in there and just put some really large swaths of paint in it. I want to keep it pretty much simple at this point. Okay, so now I convinced myself that everything's moving along pretty good. I got a pretty nice layout with this thing. I got my warms and cools kind of set up. And so now what I'm going to do is sort of cross-pollinate. You can see I'm going between the two color mixtures and putting more of the hint of the stones in, the textures on top of it. Up to this point, I've been just trying to get everything to kind of work together pictorially. And now I'm sort of kind of coming here, and you can see that even using my finger to kind of smudge stuff up. But I'm moving from the warms of the first part of the lay-in, from the warm part, the lit part of the bridge, and then I'm coming back in and putting that into the stones a little bit more. And then using more of a dagger brush here. I love these dagger brushes because you can go from really thin to really thick paint. And once again, you can see I'm mixing warms into cools, and then those little jabs here are just hinting at, I wouldn't say a random, but a sort of a rhythmic sense of the stones in the wall. I don't want to overdo it too much, because then if I put up too much of a pattern, then your eye's going to go right to it, and it's pretty obvious that it's a stone wall. It's not made out of marshmallows. So there's that balance. You have to kind of go in between the shadow, the texture, and like I said, the iconography of what you're looking at. Now come in here and feeling kind of comfortable about that. So this is the little white reflections of the sky where the bridge meets the water. And then using that white, coming back here and doing the same thing. Once again, kind of noticing that I take my finger and sort of like smudge the edges sometimes if it becomes too uniform. This is like kind of my first shot at putting the highlights in. Not too much. I don't want to outline stuff, but I do want to keep the lost and found edges in there. So the back edge of that boat is I really want to make sure that I hit that a little bit more. Okay, folks, now it's showtime here. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm using that dagger brush, and this is where I'm going to start to put in, we wouldn't call them details so much as information about, like, say, hitting the sides of the turrets and make sure that the shadow patterns there. Maybe those like little windows. I don't want to get the windows too dark, because in the shadow size, believe it or not, it's not as dark as the lid size because of the value and light contrast. So little teeny tiny accents there. It's not, again, not so much about the color of the accents. It's sort of more about the value, because when it gets that tiny or that thin, most of the time you really don't notice the intensity of the color unless it's really, really super saturated. So I'm putting in accents so you can be able to see perhaps where little hints of the shadows underneath the ramparts, or like that bounce light and the shadows that come off the doors. Like even those are just a couple little areas where the gutters are, and here is a slight little shadow back underneath the top of the turrets there. And even that, you can see I'm using my finger to kind of drab some stuff out, because I don't necessarily want it to be that over the top. I want that tower to move in with the bridge. I want it to move in with the rest of the painting and not become overloaded too much with details, even though I may be sitting there or looking at reference and see every stone that's in that wall. I know that I have to edit to light and color, which is what I'm doing with that wall there. You can see the little transparent flat brush orange over the top of the lit side of the wall, or the more purplish area on the shadowed side, creating sort of, hopefully creating sort of a depth of texture and light over form. Even they're just putting a little green in there just for the idea that there might be a little bit of moss or a little bit of algae on that side of the tunnels. It's not there in the photograph, but once again, my experience when a lot of times when you're painting, like I said, tunnels or water, is that you do have a little mossy buildup in areas. It's just a nice little accent. And getting rid of the busyness. So again, I use that dagger brush. You can see I can use it very linearly. Like now I'm moving down and hopefully tying in the roughness of that shadow, that cast shadow, in with the rest of it. Let's pull our reference up here so we can take a look at the actual thing and be able to make comparisons about the brush strokes and the information I'm putting down. And when I say information, I don't mean so much details. It's literally like right now as I put this down, as I lay the marks in, is I'm painting in the ribs of the boat. So you can see that, again, it's sort of a hand-built wooden boat. I'm not copying what I'm seeing there because that would just be too redundant. I'm still trying to keep the spontaneity to the painting and leaving the mistakes in. So there I sort of lay that edge of the boat in, use a little bit of dry brush, kind of continue that around the corner a little bit more. And as I lay all of this information in, you can see once again that I'm sort of accenting shadows and thin lines against thick lines and trying to make the composition as interesting as possible and still give the information about that rhythm of those boats moving back in space. And right now it's all pretty much ultramarine blue and the burnt umber in there to make darks. So I am accenting shadow shapes, smaller shadow shapes in there. And also sort of playing up the curvature of the boat as opposed to the angularity in the bridge and the tower. And then even the curving lines in the ripples of the water that are going to be there. One thing you might notice though is that I really, even though there's lighter areas in the boat, I never really try to override that and ruin that shadow effect. Again, that shadow coming off the bridge, across the harbor, and into those fishing boats. If I start to make it too high contrasty, it's going to break apart. And it's that shadow shape and those shadow values that are like leading me through this. So no matter what details I put into it or what information I put into it, it doesn't overwhelm the entire composition. There's a continuity, hopefully, through the entire thing. So as I sit there and look at the object or objects or a composition or landscape or whatever that may be, what I'm doing is I'm using editing constantly in it. Like how much do I really need to put into my painting for it to work? And once again, that's one of the reasons I love gouache, is that you can go super thick. Like here, you can see I'm doing some quick dry brushing. Gives a really nice texture over the top of that. And I also know that, of course, you can do this in watercolor. It's just the density of things that you can build sometimes. Like you can really put that paint on thick and get warm colors over cool colors and get a lot of different kind of like textural information. I think that's the beauty of gouache as a medium, is the fact that it's very forgivable. You can come in there and use a real super thick opaque mixture to go over the top of portions of your composition that need texture, or they need, like I said, they need some very small little details on stuff, but even be able to fix areas. So you could have a really dark area and then mix up a very light thick mixture of paint and go right over the top of the thing that you painted before. It's a really great medium to fix your screw ups, your mess ups, right? So it's forgiving. It's the, like I said before, if you're out traveling and using this, there's no fear of the process. And so the thing I also love about it is that it makes for like a really compact composition. What I mean by that is that without the over reliance on line, you can go in and you can paint those fishing boats looking like they're you could bounce a thermonuclear bomb off of it, but at the same time, the water next to it is very translucent and very transparent and very wispy. it's like I said, it's a great medium for being able to capture all these different textures and being able to layer different techniques on one another. So now I'm kind of hitting the last steps here and painting the rigging, right? So I go into that purple mess I have above there in my palette and mix a little bit of orange into it, so I get this warmish look on the rope, on the rigging that's there, or even some of the like little pieces of towels and fabric on the inside of the boat, and then lighten it up a little bit, and then hit the accents on top. So that's like where it comes over, and you can see the contrast in between, say, the dark part of the boat and the other part. This is like, once again, why I love gouache, is you can go right over the top of one really super dark color with a fairly transparent light color, and the color underneath will shine through like the properties of watercolor, but at the same time it'll give a really solid appearance to even small objects that you're painting. So I'm adding the ropes and rigging to it, but making sure that it doesn't overwhelm the composition with a bunch of spidery little lines all over the place. I can get the idea, and even like you can see, adding a little bit of light right to the top of the rigging there, where the, like again, that ambient light coming from the sunrise hits the top of those ropes. So I'm being very, I don't know, judicious about where I put that information in. And when I lay in the ropes or even the other pieces of information, it's meant to tie the ships together visually. Or if you see the way I painted down the sides of the boats, it goes vertically. So the viewer will look at it, and even if I've kind of screwed up the painting a little bit, the ropes will give the idea of the size and the depth of the craft that I'm looking at. Once again, I can't beat it up too much because when I put this in, I don't want the shapes of the boats to get overwhelmed with the secondary pieces of junk, right? I don't want like all these like little spindly lines all over the place. But as you can see here, I am adding the signage in the boats, but even that, not so much copying it off of the side of the boat or what the names are, just hinting at it. If I start to overdo it too much, people are going to want to start to read the name of the boat or the numbers as opposed to the size and the shape and the form of the boat. And even you can see, even scale-wise, it helps move your eye back in perspective. The technique I do is I load up more white paint for the boats in the front, the names of the boats in the front, or even the rigging. And then as my paint gets less and less in the brush, it gets thinner, and then I move it into the background. That way, again, it helps with the atmospheric perspective of what you're painting. And now I'm putting in the shadows that come off of that. Now sometimes, again, using sort of more urban sketching techniques, I might use colored pencils or watercolor pencils to do this kind of work in it, but I want to keep it clear to the idea of just using gouache and then using those cast shadows coming off of those ropes and such to help with the three-dimensionality of the space that we're dealing with, you know, the depth and the tying together. It takes a little bit more time. You don't want to get those lines too thick because it's not going to be realistic, the rigging that's there. Well, it is a little bit more surgical at this point. So now that I kind of got my blue set up, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of that orange that I have built over on the left side of the palette and start to add a little bit of that ambient glow, the bounce light that comes off the tower and the bridge, and kind of put it on the top of those seats of the boats. Not a lot, just like little accents, so you get the idea that like I said before, it's just hitting little glints here and there. If I overdo it too much, it can what it's going to do is it's going to create too much of a contrast. So here's the final thing. As I come back in and kind of once again walk back from the piece and just see those last little accents. You can see I'm darkening up those little seats in the background because they're pushing too much to the foreground. So I'm sort of knocking the values back. So that boat in the front is the dominant one. And it also goes with the shadow pattern. In the photograph, it always looks like there's a lot more light actually hitting the boats than there really is in real life. That's the thing about sitting there and actually looking at this. You can actually see the way the light really works. And if you have to work off photographs, you can readjust it to make it a lot more believable. And you can understand like deep shadows and reflections and like I said before, bounce light, which is going to make a painting a lot more vibrant and exciting. Sometimes you got to cheat this stuff out. Speaking of bounce light, there was a little right there. A little bit more saturated light there. Again, I want to pick up the sort of sky color a little bit more, but not such a high contrast where it separates away from the rest of the composition. Even then, it's in little accents. Since this is in real time, you can kind of see my indecision and going back and forth, and kind of again thinking how it accents the entire composition. That's the important part at this time, is you do notice the information and the details, but you don't get too overly caught up in it. The way I'm putting the paint down right now is sort of more accenting the corners and edges of things. And like take, for instance, just even the top of the rope right there where the light's catching it. And I'm mixing up a pretty thick paint, once again, because, again, I want to hit those leading edges of the objects a little bit more. So when you look at the actual palettes here, you can see on the left-hand side the warmer sections, like say for the tower and for the bridge. And remember, that's more for the textures of stones and all the rest of it. And on the right-hand side, you can see the blues for the boats, the green reflections on the ocean water there. It may look chaotic, but it is organized. I am definitely pulling colors from one side to the other, but I'm making sure that I keep the original base colors of the oranges and say the blues in there just for effect. That I can always go back in and pull those colors out later. So we're going to do a little tour here so you can perhaps see all the different techniques and layering of paint there. You can see the glazes and then even the white of the paper that's left from the dry brushing. In the shadow side there, you can see all the different warms and cools. There's the texture of the stones. The multi-blues that I use in different mixtures. Dry brush, transparent wet on wet technique. Once again, there's a real sort of abstractness to it, but when you pull back from it, it all makes sense. And you can see the marbleizing there in the columns, where the different paints are not totally mixed in the palette. There's wet on wet. A little quick dry brush over the top for texture. Cast shadows coming off of the different cast shadows coming off the ropes. Little accents on the top of the boats there for the light. So when we pull back from this into the final paintings, you'll be able to see the reference and the painting together. And it'll show you one of the reasons why I really love the gouache, the fact that it's very, very changeable. It's very forgiving. It creates, to me, a very solid composition that you can almost reach out and touch the objects and forms. So needless to say, I find gouache to be a really dynamic media. And I hope this video gives you enough confidence and interest so you can go out and give it a shot with your own artwork. Thanks again for watching and listening. See you later.
You answered a lot of questions there typed. If anybody has any more questions that you want to ask Gary, we can answer them live now that our demo is over. But thanks everyone for really good, great questions. And there was one question that went up there and I didn't see the answer. You typed the answer and then it disappeared. And the question was, how do you keep your paints clean when you're just kind of dipping from one to, to the other? Are you
Well,
wiping off in between?
No, what I do is, even within that little box that's there, here, speaking of the devil, we both have our weapons here.
Transom. And somebody asked me, what's the name of this box? It's called
It's
a
called,
transom box.
it's called a transom box. And you can go on Amazon, there's got to be a billion different Chinese knockoffs. In
Yeah.
fact, I just bought, I found a place that sells 6 of them for $26.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so they're usually run around $12, but so what I do is getting into here is what I'll do is I'll take one corner of one of the boxes and I'll pull the paint off from that. That's one thing I like about gouache. It stays, especially the fluid stuff, is that you don't have to go into the brush and dig into it. It's all wet. So and it doesn't take much. So all you got to do is you don't even have to really push the brush in much, except on maybe a couple of the colors. And I'll pick a corner of it. So like if I'm here,
Yeah.
I'll pick the lower right-hand corner and pull the paint from that. And then the upper left-hand side is the pure paint. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense because it doesn't dry at all, guys. This is it's the consistency of like pudding or custard or something.
Yeah. And the thing I like about it is then you'll know this is that this cover has a rubber seal on it.
Yeah.
So what happens when you put it down and clamp it, it actually pressurizes the paint. So you can put it upside down and it won't run. It won't run into the top of the paint thing, which is really cool.
Yeah.
You get a little slop over every now and then, but the main thing you got to do is before you you clean the edges off so the seal remains really clean.
Yeah, that's right. So that makes a lot of sense because if you've got watercolor and the things are, each little palette, like little
box.
Yeah, if they're dry, then you really kind of have to scrub a little bit. And then, you're mixing the paint colors together, but this is like pudding. You just have to touch it, I think.
And then you have that little enamel palette, and then it slips right in there, and then you can paint up into that, and you don't have to worry about painting in the, mixing your paint in the boxes. You just put it on the palette and move it. And the great thing is that if you fill up one side of the palette, what you can do is the enamel palette, you just turn it around and then the other side will be clean.
Do you have a palette there with you? You're gonna make him really dig through. Oh wow, so that's pretty big.
The devil. That's for my desert trip.
Okay, you can probably get smaller ones, right?
Oh yeah, well this is 5 by 7 inches.
Okay, yeah, I'm thinking maybe I would get one that's just this size. It just sits into it.
Now you want something bigger, so see what you do is this.
Right. Well, I travel really light. I can't afford large palettes like that. Otherwise, I can't pack my underwear.
This is $10.
No, it's not a question of money. It's this. I have a very small suitcase.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they make smaller ones.
All right. Well, so does anybody have any questions here? Let's just have a look. Lots of people saying thank you, being so nice and polite. Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Perry is asking, he says, Gary uses colored pencils a lot in his plein air paintings. At what point does he decide to do this rather than just leave it as a complete gouache painting? It's a good question.
Yeah. Normally, again, it comes down to, and a lot of the pencils I use it's a cross between polychrome and watercolor pencils. So if I want a certain effect, like it has to do a lot with texture. So if I'm working on a rock wall or boat or, even the water you saw there, if I'm not quite getting the roughness of what I'm looking at, is that I'll come over and I'll do a layover of that and then put water over the top of that and then do another layover the top of that. So it's more like a mixed media piece.
All right. So got a few really interesting questions here. Thanks, Perry, for asking that. Jim is asking to please chat about palette layout a bit more, separation of temperatures and values. Do you do that?
Yeah, in this, yeah, pretty much. It just goes from white and then warms, then to cools. So I sort of put the greens in the middle. It goes to the polluting thing again, is that
Yeah.
I don't want my blues too close to my reds and yellows. So I kind of put the greens in between. And then there's my earth colors with just a little bit of black. And I don't paint with black unless it's like something industrial. Like if I'm painting tires on cars or sometimes the undercarriage of machinery, I'll use black, but not a lot.
Yeah, and so if you do pollute your little
Palette
area,
thing.
yeah. So can you like just pick the paint out
Oh
with
yeah,
a bit of paper towel or something?
or a Q-tip. Usually I carry just a few Q-tips, but yeah, it comes out pretty easily. Like I said, it's wet,
Yeah.
so you don't have to re-energize the mixture. You can
No.
just take and I have a little tiny palette knife. Speaking of like lightweight, with a real sharp edge, so I can always come up there and surgically kind of dig
Yeah.
stuff out if I need to.
Okay, yeah, because it is the texture is that the consistency is like pudding, really.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. And so Judith is asking, did you prepare the paper with anything like gesso before you started painting?
Nope, just right straight into the paper. Or I use illustration board
Illustration.
or sketchbooks, one of the two.
Okay. Diane is asking what kind of what brand of tube paints do you prefer?
So right now, the two that I use Holbein and Winsor Newton. And the Winsor Newtons I find are a little bit more, they can take a little bit more abuse, if that makes any sense. They kind of solidify a little bit better. And but the colors are good. But I use it mostly for earth colors and sort of like some of the blues and some of the yellows. But my real juicy ones, I go for the Holbeins. But they have a tendency to be a little bit more on the fluid side. So yeah, you get a little bit of spillover every now and then, but those colors are really super juicy.
Yeah, cool. All right. Yeah, I looked these. I bought these in Mexico, the paints.
Oh.
And, yeah. And I don't know what the brand is, but that's all I could find. So
That's okay.
yeah.
Um,
Lois says, do you prefer any paper or paint brand? You just said paint brand
paint,
already. Any paper?
Well, sketchbooks, I usually go for C. White of Brighton. They're like, the nice thing I like about C. White of Brighton ones is that the texture of the paper is consistent on both sides. So if you open it up for this like big panorama, you're not painting on a smooth side and a rough side. They're both rough. So you have that consistency all the way across. Generally for the for like really like smaller stuff, I like handbook or a Reza. Art
What's the
Reza.
second thing?
What's that?
I didn't hear. What was the second?
Oh, for the smaller sketchbook, it's a Retza, and the company used to be called Handbook, and they're built like a tank. I love, and the paper's really thick too.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So let's see. Lois wants to know, does the gouache ruin good watercolor brushes?
I think it's a little bit more of a hardy material, so it probably goes through brushes more. I know that my rosemary dagger brushes, I have a tendency to every 6 or 8 months I have to go back in and re-buy a couple.
Yeah. So do you use watercolor paper?
No, I use I'm reaching over here. What I use a lot is these cottonwood panels. They're pre-made and they're cheap too. And I'm the people that actually run the company, which is really good. But they're really nice. They come in packets. They got rounded edges on them or square edges depending, and they're nice and very travelable.
And last question, Joseph says, thanks, Gary. Is there anything you do to preserve your finished gouache paintings?
Nope.
No.
Okay. Don't spray anything on them. Don't. We were talking yesterday about the acrylic gouache. When you could use acrylic gouache, I do have a varnish that goes over the top of it.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, Gary. That was really fantastic. I think people were taking notes and really watching carefully and had lots of really great questions. Thanks everybody for coming out to play. Also, we have some wonderful vacation workshops coming up this year. The next one with tickets still available is Edinburgh. There's 2 tickets left with Kosha Kuna in July. And we'll be in Brittany in September with Hazel Sohn. We'll be in Paris in September with Stephanie Bauer. I'm forgetting one, the French Alps. We'll be in the French Alps in September with Renata Lahal, and then in Malta in November with Alex Hilkertz. Tickets are still available for all of those workshops this year. And Gary and I are talking. We are talking. And what we're talking about is a wonderful, gorgeous vacation workshop next year, 2025, in June, in, drum roll, Gary, where are we going?
Orvieto, Italy. My
Orvieto.
favorite small Italian town of all time.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. So I'm excited. I've never been there, but I wrote about the Orvieto Cathedral in my master's thesis, and I've never seen it. Yeah.
Oh, it's a beaut. It's one of my favorites.
So cool with the gargoyles and all the devils and demons on carved to the outside.
The beauty of that place is that that's where Michelangelo went to study. So before he did the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
There's all those demons and stuff, and they're beautiful. The anatomy is just wonderful in them.
Yep. I'm very excited to see that in person. So if you're interested, go to our website. And also, as soon as you get to the website, www.studio56bg.com, there's going to be a pop-up that invites you to subscribe to our newsletter. And if you do that, then you'll be kept up to date on all the stuff that's coming up. And also you'll be given access to another free demo, a different demo. Won't tell you who. And so that demo is given as a gift for everybody who signs up for our newsletter. So great day today. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Gary. That was
my pleasure. It was great. Thanks for all your questions. They were really good.
Yeah, they were good. All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay.
Happy Tuesday. See you next time.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.